So what now? Going back to that idea that it's inevitable, right? The person's just bad, it's maladaptive. Now we reject all of those premises. We know that's not true. Behavior is not inevitable. Behavior is learned. Just because you have autism doesn't mean you're going to have problem behavior. Just because you are neurotypical and don't have a label doesn't mean you can't have problem behavior. It comes down to individuals and their learning histories, the consequences that they've experienced that shape their behaviors. So problem behavior is learned, and the beauty of that is if it's learned, then it can be unlearned, and new skills can be taught. Remember from yesterday when we talked about the learn unit, we control 2/3 of all the learning interactions, which gives us huge optimism and power for positive change in the direction that we want, that will be to the benefit of the student. Problem behavior, it occurs as a function of the interplay between the person and their environment. So it's not primarily within the person. It's not because they are deviant in any way. They've just experienced things, antecedents and consequences in their environments, and that's resulted in what we're seeing today, and we can change that. And it's highly adaptive. So when I said we don't use the word maladaptive, problem behavior is highly adaptive. Problem behavior is inherently communicative behavior. My problem behavior is saying, I don't want to do this, give me that, right? Give me some attention. Those are the primary messages of problem behavior. So don't call it maladaptive behavior. I came across this last year, I kind of liked it. Because you cannot reduce a behavior until you stop feeding it, right? Problem behavior is living on something, it's eating something. And if you want it to die, you have to stop feeding it. In order for the problem behavior to die, you have to figure out what the source of food is and then take it away. That's kind of a way of looking at function, right? The function is what's feeding it. Right? So think of it as a living, breathing thing, and it's eating, and you're going to take away its food source and teach it to find a new food source. So the next step is to find out, what is it eating? What's the function? So there we get into functional behavior assessment. So we need to focus our efforts and resources on answering that WTF question, why is the behavior occurring? When a problem behavior is brought to us, this is the first thing we do. Ask the question, why, and engage in a series of strategies to answer the question. So we can focus our efforts and resources on being proactive and preventative. As I said earlier, I'm not interested in what you do after the problem behavior. I mean, we will have to address that, but I want to spend the vast majority of our time and resources and effort on the other half of the other majority of the equation. How are we going to prevent it in the first place? Because wouldn't life be better that way? So here's an acknowledgement for some of the materials, and I'll cite them on the slides as we use them. I'm a team member and board member of Positive Behavior Intervention Supports Canada, and there's the French term as well, which I won't say. I'll just butcher it. There's the PBS Canada website. Several of the slides that you're going to see are with the PBS Canada logo at the bottom were developed by my colleagues Brenda Fawcett and Joe Lucician for that school training that I described, that full meal deal 7-day package that I did in Nanaimo. And I've used these materials in Nanaimo, and I've also gone up to Fort St. John a number of times with the support of the Making Connections Society to do functional assessment, positive behavior support training for school district staff. So I want to give a shout out to them. So here's the process for identifying and solving problem behaviors. We're really going to break this down today. So first is identify the problems and the goals, gather information, which is your interviewing and observing, and develop a function-based hypothesis. At the end of gathering the information, this is just the initial stage. What's the problem? I engage in a process of trying to answer the question WTF, and at the end of it, I should have an idea or a hypothesis about, I think it's for escape, I think it's for attention, I think it's for tangible. And at that point, the functional assessment part of it is done, and I can take this hypothesis and now develop a function-based plan to try and remediate the problem behavior. I design the plan, we implement it with fidelity and take some data and monitor it to see if not only are the problem behaviors decreasing, but the new skills we're trying to teach to see that those are increasing to fill the void. Because if you suppress a behavior and you don't fill the void, something else is going to fill the void, right? If you think about kids, in an old school example, kids who are passing notes in class, if they get punished for that, they're just going to find a new way of passing notes in class, right? It's a whack-a-mole scenario because you haven't addressed the function, right? The passing the notes is maintained by the attention that it gets. That's what's feeding it. And just by punishing a few hand passes, you haven't addressed the fact that they're still motivated to get that attention. They're just going to find a new way of doing it, right? And one of the problems with punishment that I didn't talk about earlier is the idea of behavioral variability. If you punish a behavior and you don't replace it with something else, you don't fill that void, then you have created the situations for creativity where the student will now be thinking, that didn't work. Let me find a new and creative way of doing something bad. And it gets even worse. And you've actually created the conditions for the student to come up with new and creative ways of being bad. Right? So don't create a vacuum. So first, what are we talking about in terms of the functional assessment? All functional assessments start with an interview. You have to go talk to the people involved. What are you seeing? Let me get some information from the people on the ground. So behavior is observable. So one of the first questions we want to know is, what does it look like specifically? And our technical jargon term for this is topography. What's the topography of the problem behavior? Tell me exactly what it looks like. And you'll hear, oh, he melts down. Okay. That's a summary term that actually doesn't tell me anything about what the actual problem behavior looks like. Oh, it's really bad, he goes nuclear. Okay, my definition of really bad nuclear is probably quite different from your definition. So let's operationalize it. Define specifically what is really bad, what is a nuclear meltdown. So get specific. We need to know exactly what we're looking for so that if you give me your description of what the problem behavior is and I go sit in the classroom and I observe, I can see, oh, yep, he's doing that, he's doing that. Oh, he's doing a bunch of other things that you didn't say. I think they're a problem, but they're not part of your definition. So what are we talking about here? We need to make sure we're on the same page. Related to that, how often is it happening? How many times per day? How long does it last? And it's often helpful to get both the frequency and the duration. So for example, I could talk to one teacher who says, well, he engages in one problem behavior a day. That doesn't sound so bad. And then I go talk to the next door teacher and say, how many times does your student engage in problem behavior? 5 times a day. Well, that sounds far worse. Well, I've got frequency information, but I don't have duration information. So I go back to the other teacher and say, once a day, okay, but how long does it last? 3 hours. And I go to the other teacher, 5 times a day? How long does it last? 30 seconds. Right? Oh, so you've got 2.5 minutes of problem behavior a day, and this person has half the school day. Right? So that's why it's important to know how long in addition to how much in some cases. So knowing what it looks like and the frequency or duration is important. So here's a cool video around topography. We were checking the audio this morning and I think we're good. All right.
I'm a little monkey, pacifier junkie. I love Cheerios. They fit in my nose. Peanut butter goes far into your VCR. Har, 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 har. I'm your toddler.
Ask a toddler. Special delivery. Number 1. How to throw a tantrum. Here's how I like to throw a tantrum. Do lots of crying. Kicking. Fly race. Throwing stuff is good. Bang your heads against the wall. Of course you had to scream. No, Daddy's taking a picture. Cat people. I look forward to see you have a tantrum soon. That's all we have to say. I look forward to throwing a tantrum soon.
I look forward to throwing a tantrum soon. This is quite old, as you can tell from the intro, where she talked about stuffing peanut butter far into the VCR. Har, har, har. What's a VCR? This dad actually put a series of clips of his daughter up on YouTube way back when. I'd like to meet her now and see what she thinks of all these things being out there used widely. But it's a wonderful example of topographies, right? She breaks down, this is what my tantrum looks like, into quantifiable terms, right? She's operationally defined her tantrum. So that's essentially what we want to do for our students. If we're talking about problem behavior, break it down so that it's very specific. We know what we're all looking at. I wanted to quickly answer a few questions that came to me after we ended last night and show you a couple samples of kind of the full meal deal of IEP, all the elements we talked about brought together. Question number 1, how do we reconcile the move with the new reworked curriculum and the push towards summative assessment for the general population when it seems contrary to the data-based formative assessment? Great question. First of all, don't get me started on the new curriculum. We have to have a long conversation over drinks about that one. There's great things about it, but there's things that are a bit of a concern, in particular for kids with autism. But you can have both formative and summative assessments. So for example, I teach an Intro Principles first-year university course at Capilano University, and we've got lots of education assistants who take it as an approved elective. And last year when I taught it, I have a quiz every single week, and then a final exam at the end that is kind of a culmination of all those quizzes. And so the quizzes are formative assessment. It lets the students know week by week, chapter by chapter, and concept by concept how well they're doing. And by the time the final exam rolls around, they know which chapters they did really well in the quizzes and those of which that they didn't, and they can focus their studying accordingly and then do better on the final exam. And the course evaluations are very positive, and they basically thank me, saying, at first when you said we're gonna have quizzes every week, I was like, ugh. Maybe I should drop this course. But it turned out to be the best course because I knew how I was doing the whole way through. And I wound up remembering more in this course and doing really well on the exam as a result. So you can have both formative and summative. It doesn't have to be either or. Next, second question. For a student who may be more impacted by their autism, who also has strong bolting behavior, where do you start working towards increasing distance when hand holding or lanyard holding serves as a needed prompt to walk rather than run? Or you are actually having to hold on to prevent active bolting behavior, which is imminent, and then do it in our underfunded, lack of multiple personnel needed to even work on a PECS training regimen properly. Can you hack your intervention? First of all, that's a run-on sentence. That's my first thought. That's okay. Bit of a grammar geek. Hack the intervention, I like that. This is a big challenge, right? So the first thing you should do, and we're gonna talk about that today, when someone brings a problem to you and wants help, you shouldn't just start spouting out ideas. You should first figure out, well, why is the bolting occurring? Because to me, bolting can be occurring for one of two primary reasons. To get away from something I don't want to do, or because when I bolt, you chase me and it's fun and I get all sorts of attention. And there could be other functions as well, but those two pop into my mind. So you have to start with a functional behavior assessment, which we'll do today, to figure out the function and have a plan. But the big thing I'd be thinking about here, hacking the system because it's underfunded, you don't have a lot of resources, is starting small. So I've worked with lots of bolters. And in some cases, the problem with bolting is you have to attend to it because it's a safety risk. The person's literally running away. So how can we hack that? It depends on the environments available to you. With one of my students, they made a deal with the church down the street from the school that had a gym with one entrance in and out, that they could have access to the gym during the school day. And they went to the gym to work on bolting because there was one entrance and they could let the student in. And if he bolted, he couldn't go anywhere because I was standing at the only exit. And so I didn't have to chase him and then deliver the reinforcement that he was looking for. And then we started to reinforce him for when he came back. And so we started to flip the contingency on him. His bolting was maintained by attention. He liked the chase. When we went to the gym, he didn't get the chase. And when he returned to us, we started to deliver reinforcers. Because when you think of it, if you stay with me, you get nothing except I probably bring you to more work. But if you run away, you get all sorts of entertainment, right? And so we had to flip that contingency around until he would go into the gym and we'd call him and he'd come straight back to us and he'd get reinforcement, right? Step one, where do you go from here? You can't just go back into the hallways at school because he's gonna bolt again, right? So you think of the next controlled environment. Can we have another similar controlled environment at school that we could go to? And then from there, what's the next evolution and the next evolution? So you're not gonna solve a really challenging problem like bolting with one slam dunk solution. You're gonna need to shape it. You're gonna need to have some successive approximations, a series of controlled environments where you can systematically, right, release the tether and increase the distance. And you have to think of it incrementally, and that's where having a plan can help, as opposed to, how did you work on bolting today? Well, when we were in the change room, he didn't bolt there. Well, that's really not part of a plan. How is this being done systematically? Every day, you're contriving the learn unit. You're setting up the antecedents so that the student will be successful. And I'm giving that example with one person doing it. Ideally, you'd have two people available, right? You'd have a prompter, but this person is asking a question, how do we solve these when we have lack of funding? We don't have two people available. You really just have to get creative and then work on it every single day. And in the long term, you have to start, right? Otherwise, what's the future for the student who's bolting through high school and after high school? There's no positive future if this isn't addressed. So start somewhere and start small and build from there. But know your function. I've actually worked with a bolter one time. Funny story because, 1 point for him, he figured this out. We tried the controlled environment space where he could run away and we didn't have to chase him, and his bolting was maintained by tension. And he got to the end of where he could go and he looked back at us and he realized we weren't coming. And he's used to getting some type of response when he does this, so he pulled his pants down and he peed in the school. Guess what we have to do? No, you can't pull your pants down. No, you can't pee. And so, 1 point for him. We had to attend, which means we had to reinforce the problem behavior. And then we had to go back to the drawing board and figure out how are we smarter than a 6-year-old, right?